Thank you, Jeff. Thank you, Mary. Thanks to everybody for joining. I'm gonna just to give you an overview of structure of things. I'm gonna talk about. Um, we're gonna go through brief history of how I developed this tool, and then go a little bit deeper into why you would want to use it. What are the interactive reasons you might have to choose it? We'll look at some examples that my customers have created, and then we'll actually go into InDesign and kind of pick apart an interactive file. And normally I talk about these things in like 60 minutes, but we've got about 90 minutes, which means I'm not going to have to motor mouth through them. So that's going to be kind of nice. I'm going to try and relax a little bit, and hopefully we'll have a nice calm journey through all this, and then hopefully about 30 minutes of questions. If you have questions in the meantime, I would say put them in the chat pod, and Jeff and Mary, feel free to interrupt me at any point if you think there's a relevant question. That will not bother me at all. But otherwise, we'll have some dedicated time at the end to go through questions. All right, let's get started. So, initially, the place that this came from has to do with my time as a Flash designer and developer. I was able to create things that worked on all devices the same way. And then, as many of you know, the iPhone came out, and then even more consequentially, the iPad. And Apple decided they didn't want Flash on those devices. Adobe didn't fight them on it. And us creatives were left with the challenge of how do we create content for these new devices that everybody wants content for. And so it's a pretty simple challenge. I just wanted to let designers be able to create interactivity, because the role that I played, the designer developer, they used to call that person a unicorn because there just were not a lot of them. But I knew a lot of talented designers, and it's just the tooling hadn't caught up to let them create stuff. And oddly, a lot of it is still behind today. But that was the initial bit, and it just had to work on mobile as well as desktop, because obviously we're trying to have things work wherever we go, kind of back to that original mission of the Flash player. And so when looking at existing formats, the kind of one a lot of us know from working in InDesign is an interactive PDF. And we'll get into it when we get into InDesign, but there's actually a huge amount of interactive tooling in InDesign. And don't worry if you don't know it, I'll show you where to find it. But it's immense, and it's been in there since like CS5. And they're great tools. So we'll take a look at them momentarily. The question has been to date, where are you exporting this stuff? How is it working? How are you getting it to your clients and customers? And so interactive PDF would be, one of those potential ways, but a lot of things don't work. Animation doesn't work if you're creating that in InDesign. A video currently doesn't work. You can't sneak it in with animated GIFs. You can't do multi-state objects, which is, a huge piece of how you create interactivity with InDesign. It's kind of the skeleton key for creating interactive stuff, and we'll take a look at examples of that momentarily. You can't embed content, so you can't take YouTube videos or interactive maps, anything where you get that embed code and drop it in. Can't do that in a PDF. Oops, sorry, little delay on my screen. And you can't control any of these things, obviously, so InDesign has the ability to control a lot of the interactivity with buttons, but in an interactive PDF, you really only have a limited amount of things you can do with a button. You can maybe go to a URL. You might be able to hide and show other buttons, at least with most PDF readers. But that's one of the challenges, is that instead of having that single Adobe branded PDF reader or Acrobat, we've got dozens and dozens of different types of PDF readers that people are opening PDFs on. So even if something works when we look at it, when we export it on our machine, we don't know that it's going to work when it gets to the other person. And so we don't have that kind of reliability. And you can't extend the functionality anyway. For example, if you want a scrollable frame, if you don't want to have all the text all on screen at one time, if you got a lot of text, it's not something you can do with a PDF. And you can't really control how the pages are displayed or how it behaves. This is true of an EPUB as well. It's the assumption of the format is that you're creating a book. And PDF is kind of similar. It has an assumption on what the format is. And then even if you can set up some things, but again, the person viewing it on the other end isn't necessarily going to see those things, right? They're going to see it however their PDF viewer is displaying it. So how do we control those things? And you can't do anything that's seriously responsive. So we're going to look at that in today's presentation as well. And just quickly, why don't these things work? Animation was never supported. Video was Flash-based, so this is a big piece of why I would just steer clear of interactive PDFs at all. There was this assumption when these formats were newer that the person had the Flash player. So Adobe would distribute Acrobat and their PDF reader with Flash built into it. So somebody didn't have to have the right version of Flash installed. They would just have the reader and they would have Flash without even knowing it under the hood. It's not the case anymore, and Flash is going away completely. And most of these things just were never supported. This is just not part of the PDF standard. And as I mentioned a moment ago, there's no way to extend that, not in any kind of reliable way that's going to work on everybody's devices. And as I mentioned, it's their apps that are controlling how they're displayed. So you don't have any say if you wanted to create a flip book, if you wanted to look more like an app, if you wanted to say constrain the navigation so they couldn't go page 1, 2, 3, 4, but you wanted them to jump certain places or to hide things based on choices they make inside there. Can't do any of those things reliably because the app that the person is using to view the file just exposes it without you, the designer, having control of it. And responsive layouts obviously never conceived because that was older. They have, I think they're working on something that can kind of adapt it automatically in Adobe's reader. But as the designer, you don't get to choose how it looks. And we're going to look at how you can choose that when you're using in5 and HTML. So let's go to some examples. The first one is this presentation is built in InDesign and in5. I literally just set up bullet lists and exported it, and it built the bullets. As you can see, let me show you again the build and then how the last one fades. I'm just clicking the next arrow key. in5 did all that for me. So that's your first hint that we now are expanding the universe of things you can create. It's not just ebooks or digital magazines or whatever you think of as the format for an interactive PDF being. It's all kinds of different stuff. So let's look at things that customers have created. This is more of a digital magazine look. This is an annual report. And I love showing this particular example because it's got some of my favorite animation. The designer does some really clever things in terms of how things build on screen. And she uses a lot of the lines in the design to determine how things come onto the page. And I'll show you an example of how I tried to recreate an animation like this one because I thought that was particularly cool. This is the same designer, same organization. 2 years later, this is what she did with the flipbook format. So she's got a lot of great animations again in here, but now the display is different, right? This is what we call in in5 the slider format. So it's sliding in, building that way. And this one is flipbook. And something a little different, this is more of an app-like piece. So it starts off with a pop-up. This was built with object states or a multi-state object. And we'll look at that a little bit when we get into InDesign. And let me show you one of these too, just kind of see what this looks like. So again, something pops up using a button to change the display. There's rollovers in here. So cool interactive piece. This is all done without coding in InDesign. And I want to reload this one because I love the animation at the beginning. The program guide for a science fair. And again, this starts with a type of pop-up with some hints. This piece is really ingenious in how they guide the student through it. So you start off choosing these 2 tracks. I always pick engineer because I love this rocket animation that takes off when it changes. And then it's really well organized in terms of going through in a sequence. So they've got all these steps, and it doesn't force you to navigate a certain way, but it kind of guides you. You don't really see this next button until you get to step 5. So that brings you through. And it's got this menu up at the top, so you can jump around if you need to, but otherwise it's just kind of tucked away. This is a college alumni magazine. It's another one of my favorite examples. So most of these, the simplest thing to do is when you're exporting is to choose to export your text as images, because that is going to give you a layout that looks exactly like InDesign. There are a lot of reasons you might want to have live text in your output, but you have to realize that HTML is not the same as InDesign in terms of its type capabilities and how it works. So it requires just a little bit more planning. And usually what I recommend, you can embed fonts automatically when you export, but for the best result, and I believe what this designer did was to use Google Fonts, and I've got tutorials on that. You can also use Adobe Fonts. So there's this beautiful, very specific typography, and it's all live text. And it requires just a little more planning and a little more testing because the spacing of the text is going to change a little bit from InDesign. You know, your lines are going to break the same way, but again, the trade-off is that you have this totally live text. This also means if you had to update this later, you just have to crack open the file and change the text. So there's a lot of power in having that kind of format that isn't a locked up box. And one last example, this is another presentation example, like the slides I started off showing you. And you saw these builds already. These are animations that can be built on. Again, another automatic setting. If you just have animations set to the click event, that takes care of it for you. And then the presentation mode, as it's called in in5, was also built in conjunction with Mark Heaps, a well-established presentation designer. I talked with him of like, what are the kinds of things you like to do in PowerPoint? What's hard? What would you like to see in InDesign? One thing he said is, we love to do these what we call push transitions, where we have this large background and the slide seems to move across the backgrounds. And it's really kind of a pain because I have to do all these pixel calculations in Photoshop and make the size right and slice it up and then place it on the PowerPoint pages and then assign the transitions so it makes sense. And we probably won't have time to look at it in detail unless somebody is really interested in this presentation mode. But this basically does it with a magic button. It'll slice up an image, put the background on different pages, and do the transitions. And then when I click the forward arrow, is this transition with this seamless background. And I can go back a slide, and I get the inverse transition. So it's totally smooth. It also works vertically. And I can go back with that. And then you can do complicated ones that involve both horizontal and vertical. So there you kind of see the range of stuff that can be created with InDesign and then exported using in5. So now I'm going to switch over and let's take a look at one of the files in InDesign, which I realize I haven't even shown you that. Okay, so before we switch over, let me show you the file I'm going to talk about. So this is a sample document. It's got a lot of interactive pieces in it. One of the first things you'll note is that there is a table of contents on this first page. This is a live table of contents. It's generated using InDesign's automatic table of contents, and these links are live. There's a scrolling frame on this page. In addition to the table of contents that we just looked at, there is a menu down here. This menu was made with an automatic builder. This is a multi-state object with buttons inside of it. And we should also have time to take a look at this. So what this does is automatically build this menu for you, but then it's still editable InDesign pieces. So you can customize it. In this case, I customized the look, and by default, it's created in the upper left-hand corner. I moved it down to the right-hand corner. So a lot of flexibility, but it takes a lot of the effort off your shoulders. Of course, video is supported. There are ways you can autoplay video, all kinds of configuration. I'll try and show you that as well when we get into InDesign. This is InDesign Animation, which is just one of my favorite InDesign features because it's so easy to create. Like I said, I was used to working in Flash. Flash was wonderful because you had all this control of a timeline, but it took quite a bit of time to do simple things. InDesign, it's very fast to do simple things. And as you'll see, you can do some more advanced things too if you know some little tricks. So in addition to this animation playing when the page loads, I can also play it from a button as well. So here's the animation where I try and mimic what the designer of the annual report had done. Let's see, in this one, I go back a page, there. So we'll take a look at how that's constructed as an example of a slightly more advanced animation. You can see the InDesign tools working there. This is another multi-state object. So if you click through, it changes the appearance, and it also can trigger an animation when you get to a new state. This is an in5 specific feature, the 3D flip card. And this is also a multi-state object. So in5 is sort of piggybacking on your InDesign tools and then allowing you to have those two states display in a specific way. Now on this page, I'm going to show you that this is responsive. So in addition to it scaling nicely, actually let me grab the bottom corner. You can see it scales proportionally. And then when I get to a certain point, it becomes a different layout. So now it's a portrait layout. And I actually have a different design in here. So I have a vertical effect on these instead of a horizontal one. Let me expand this page into the portrait. And you can see this is actually 3 slideshows. And those are quite easy to set up. And I just offset them with different timing. It's another example of multi-state objects and what you can create. So I can click on these and create pop-ups. And there's a close button in here that sets the state back to being empty, so the pop-up goes away. This is an example of complex navigation. So when I was talking about PDF and EPUB, the format's being regimented, and the idea is that we're going from page 1 to page 2. You don't have to do that with in5. Like I could remove this default navigation. There could be no menu on this page, and I could ask the user a choice. And then based on that choice, it could take them to a certain option, and that would take them one direction. And if they chose another option, that would take them a different direction. So you don't have to have linear navigation. You could have a choose your own adventure. You could be making a sales pitch and having the salesperson ask questions of the prospect, and then based on their answers, you could be tailoring the sales pitch to them by clicking buttons and changing states, changing pages. and only showing them the content that is relevant to them. That's especially useful, you know, if it's somebody's time is very valuable, like a doctor, and you're literally doing an elevator pitch. You can make it so that you've tailored that presentation, that pitch to them, and you didn't have to do any complicated coding. You just set up some things in InDesign and chose your navigation wisely. This is another example of an interactive element. This is sort of a holdover from the days of DPS. So Adobe had what they called the digital, I think at one point it was Digital Publishing Suite, and then later it was Digital Publishing Solution. But it had these tools that they had added on to InDesign. And at some point, people were asking me, well, can I use those tools for in5? Figured out how to integrate them. DPS has since gone away, and so now in5 has its own improved panels that have all the capabilities and still let you make things like this. So this is an image sequence, which theoretically could be used for a slideshow, but you can also make it interactive. And so here I'm just doing the equivalent of a swipe, but I'm doing it with my mouse, and I can manipulate this 3D object, which is just a sequence of images that was exported with Photoshop. All right, let's take a look at the document now. This is the document in InDesign. I've got a finished piece and a start piece. Let's go to the start one. Just want to show you, first of all, this is a live table of contents. So let me go to one of these pages and change something here. So if I get rid of some of this text, go back to my first page, and I will select that and go to Layout, Update Table of Contents. And now this has been updated. So now it says scrolling frame there, no colon, no subtitle. And that's live. That's still going to be linked when I export it in from in5. I want to take a moment right here just to show you how you can export from in5. There is the original panel, which I'll show you momentarily, and then there's this newer easy export wizard. And what this does is basically ask you a couple of questions based on what you're making, and you just follow them through. So in this case, oh yeah, I'm making kind of a digital magazine, but I want it to be like a modern digital style. You can see it's recommended that to me based on the document. But there's a lot of different options here. And when I select these, it basically chooses all of the things that, you know, that makes sense for this type of format. So then I'll go next. I can choose editable text or pixel perfect text. And then lastly, I just give it a title that I want to see on screen. Now, there's the advanced one, which you can get to from the menu, or I can just click advanced and it switches to the menu. And the nice thing about going from there is all of the things that I selected in the easy export wizard, it's populated in here. So the slider fade in is that modern digital format. And there are a few other features here. For example, it's going to already put the social sharing in here. So these are checked. I'm not sure if I have those. I don't think I have those actually in the output right now. But there's, you know, you get like a Twitter share and Facebook and that kind of stuff, buttons in the output automatically for you there. There's also that kind of magazine feature of having that document title and thumbnails, that kind of stuff at the bottom. All right, so there's a lot of stuff to choose from here. This is overwhelming. This is why I usually suggest you start with the easy export wizard and just choose these options. Now you may also notice that it says at the bottom here, responsive layouts detected and applied. That's because I have two layouts in here. The way that I created this second layout was to, you know, initially I just had this one here that says custom H. I think I can zoom in if you want to see it. And then what I did was click on the flyout menu and say create alternate layout. One thing I'll note is that when you do that, it copies stuff over. I'll show you, for example, since we've got plenty of time here. I'll create an alternate layout. This one is an iPad vertical, and it's by default, it's going to create horizontal. So let me click OK, and you can see what it does with this page. So it's right here. And all this stuff, sort of this weird, it's kind of all over the place. It's a little bit of a mess. And actually, this didn't do a terrible job. I don't have a ton of stuff off screen. But what I am working on in a new version is a way that creates an alternate layout for you, but then goes in and uses InDesign's adjust layout feature, which is their AI, to change layout sizes. And so it's going to do a better job of that for you. It's going to take less time. The other thing you can do is to set up liquid layout rules, which is like a whole nother thing that lets you pin things to corners and stuff like that. Most of the things that I'm going to show, including the liquid layout menu that I'm just referring to, are going to be under Window Interactive. So these are all the cool tools that, you know, when you're using InDesign on a daily basis, you may not even realize exist. But we're going to go through and look at all those things. So they're in here, and a lot of them are already open on my screen. So all these things on the left, these are native InDesign tools. All the in5 based things are going to come from this in5 menu up here. So skipping on to the next page, this is the scrolling frame. This is in5 specific. So if I go up to the in5 menu, interactive widgets, and scrolling frames, this is set to vertically scroll. And there's really only one trick with this. If I go in, double click in the text, then I'll hit escape so I have the text frame selected. Hopefully you can see that the text frame itself is much bigger than the page. And that then, if I hit escape one more time, is inside this container, which is masking it. The way I do that is, let me go back into the text frame. I'm going to cut this out. So normally this would be just on screen somewhere, and I would cut it from wherever I have it. I create this empty rectangle, and then I use paste into, which again is another rarely used InDesign feature, but for this, it's absolutely essential. And it lets me place this frame inside this container frame, and then once that's configured like that, the universal scrolling frames panel lets me choose an option there. And what you get in the output, as we saw, is this scrolling frame here. So I'm just using the mouse wheel to scroll it up and down. And similarly, we got this video. This is just an MP4 file. So if you have an MP4 that is H.264 encoded, which is just the standard, it's the type of video that works on every browser, and it's accepted by InDesign. All you do to add that video from your local computer is to go to File and choose Place and grab an MP4. And then once you have it, these options become available in the media panel. And then there is also an in5 interactive widget that has significantly more configuration options. So you can autoplay it, you can set a delay for that, you can mute it, which is really essential because most browsers won't let you autoplay any media with audio without user interaction. And this is what enables that. They're just trying to keep you from surprising users and frustrating them, which is great because then they're less likely to just close your page after it's open. You can see all the other settings here, the ability to loop. You can change what controller is there. You can have no controller, so if you want to make video as a background, that's a really popular thing. That would be the way to do it. You can also set it to cover or stretch to fill in the case that your video doesn't match the proportions of the container. And there's a couple other cool things. Captions, you can actually add captions for accessibility. And my favorite thing is this end action. So when the video ends, you can automatically have it trigger either going to the next page. So that's used a lot when people create presentations that autoplay. So I mentioned presentations at the beginning, but there is this subset of presentations where people just have slides timed to move on. That's a setting in the in5 presentation mode panel. It's just a checkbox, and then you set a duration, and you can then put a video on, and whatever your duration is set to, the video is going to play as long as it takes to play the video. And then you can trigger this action and go to the next page. So that's kind of cool. You can also send a multi-state object to a specific state. So that's really great if you want to have a call to action after your video. If you want to have a button come up like, you watch the video, now take action. It'll pop up after the video is over. And again, this is a multi-state object in your InDesign layout. So it's something you have full control over how it's displayed. So those are the video settings. Oh, every time I roll over here, if you're wondering why I'm pausing, it's because the zoom controls come down and then I can no longer click anything. So let's go to the next page. This is the animation. Now it's not configured on this page just yet, so let's go ahead and do that. I'll show you how easy it is. I can just select these 3 items I want to animate. I go to the animation panel, and then I just choose a preset. So let's say I want each of these to fade in. I'll select that. I can change the timing on each of them, and I can change which events. So they're all triggered on page load right now. I can easily add them to a button just by clicking this little target and selecting the button. Now they get all added here. Notice in the animation panel that I have named these. So let me go back here and select one of them. So you can see check 1, check 2. That makes a world of difference because then in the buttons panel and the timing panel, I can see those names. Otherwise, it would be polygon, polygon, polygon. And that's not very helpful when I'm trying to figure out which one I'm targeting. I mentioned the timing panel. This is what allows you to control how these play. So I can actually switch these around. Let's say, and notice I have the on release selected here, but if I click away from the button, I've got the on page load. So let me change the on page load just by dragging these around. So I'll have them play in reverse from bottom to top. And then I'll select the button, and you'd see on release, they're going to play top to bottom. Now I'll click the preview spread button down here. It's at the bottom of most of the interactive panels. And you can see it plays in reverse when the page loads, and it plays in order when I click the button. So I've got animation playing based on the page load and the button. It took me maybe 30 seconds. And I was kind of slow walking it, showing it to you. Like, it's just crazy how easy it is to create animation. And it's not just fade-ins. If we go to the timing panel and select one of these, let me show you. We've got, we can fly in from bottom, we can fly in from right. We can have it zoom in. There's some fancier ones. There are a few of these that aren't supported by in5. They were like Flash specific stuff, like having a smoke and stuff like that. But pretty cool stuff. And if we go to the next page, we can see that we actually have control over doing even more sophisticated things. So in this one, what I did was start out with one of those like flying from left kind of things. And what that does is add a motion path. Now I can create custom motion paths with my normal path tools, the pen and that kind of thing, and apply them to animation, or I can manipulate these existing paths. So I can actually select this, and let me just get zoomed in so you can see what I'm talking about. There's a little green line here, And that's what I'm selecting, and that's what I'm gonna tinker with here. So I've got that selected, and then I could take my direct selection tool, and I can see the points, hopefully, and I can move this over here. So I can change the angle, I can change the distance that it travels. If I were to get the pen tool, I could make this curved. Oops, let me undo and figure out the right keyboard shortcut. I think it's that one. I could make this, whoop. I can make this curved if I can remember the right keyboard shortcut and get this all right. Anyway, this is a little funky, but it's, let me get that one. Yeah, see, it's hard to select. That is the goofy thing. So this is finicky, but it's possible. You can take these points and move them around. And if I remember the right, let me get the pen tool again. Get that selected. Maybe that's my problem. Okay, now I got it selected. Now I got the right tool. And for some reason, it's just not wanting to play nice with me. Anyway, take my word for it. You can manipulate those. I think I'm just asking a little bit too much of my computer right now. Let me select this again and show you what I did on this particular animation. I just moved this motion path so that it was along this line and made sure that so it would create this effect as we saw. Let me go back and go to this animation. You see how it travels along that line as everything's coming in. So that's how I did that, selecting that path. And then the other trick is in the animation panel, there's a show animation proxy button. Let me get in real close for you. It's down here, show animation proxy. So then when I click that and I have my animation selected, it shows me where this animation is starting. So that gives me a lot of context. Again, comparing it to frame-based animation, this gives me some of that tooling. I can see the start and the end of it. Same with this one. So I could select the motion path here and move this around, and then step by step test this in my preview pane. Let me select this again so we can see that start point. So I can see roughly each of those is starting in the center in the same place, and they're coming out. I can also, change the origin point of this if I wanted to rotate. I can change the scale. I can change how the opacity works. I can change the speed. I can change easing. So if I wanted to start slowly and end quickly, or the inverse, I can do all that. I can set it to loop. So even though this is really quick, it appears very simple because I'm just selecting a preset and I can do this animation really quickly. It has these advanced features under the hood. And then even on top of that, I can trigger it with interactivity using buttons. This is first multi-state object here. So let's look at the object states panel. And let me just make this a little easier to see, hopefully. So this is an object that has different states in here. These are like the different doctor bios. So if I click on this, you can see these have different information in them. So I can just double click in here and edit it and come out, and all I've done is edit this state. I haven't changed any of the other states. And then I can trigger these states using a button. So if I go to the buttons and forms panel, this button goes to the first state. Again, I use the object states panel to name this so I know exactly where it is. You can also see, because the menu is on the master page, I have access to changing that because it appears on this page as well. select the second button, you can see that goes to the second doctor state. Again, really easy to set up. Multi-state objects are a little funky to work with because, you know, like all groups and things in InDesign, you know, you have to like double click in to get to stuff. If I want to create some new object, usually the easiest thing to do would be to create an object, you know, out here. And then what I want to do is cut it and then use my object states panel to paste the object into that selected state. So now this object is a part of that state, but it doesn't appear when I go to any of the other states. So it, you know, not always super fun to work with, but incredibly powerful. So not only can I just change the display, I can create these types of interactive behavior. So you saw these on the subsequent pages. So this is a multi-state object with the two states, and essentially the front and back. And then under the in5 menu in the interactive widgets, I use the 3D flip card to make this horizontal. Now, if you remember when we switched to the other layout, there were, let me find the right page. There we go. There were flip cards, but these were vertical, so they just had this other option selected. Super easy to set up, has this neat interactivity in the output. And it piggybacks on this powerful object states feature. I believe the slideshow also uses object states. And then it combines it with the in5 slideshow widget. So if I go there, you can see I have settings to autoplay, can do a delay, the interval time, and I can set it to loop. And there's some other things. If I want to make this swipeable, I could do that. But this is kind of your basic setup, and then each one of these has a different delay and a different interval just to create that effect that the things are operating independently. This is another example of a really great use for multi-state object. This button triggers a multi-state object. The multi-state object starts invisible, basically. So I've got this tiny invisible rectangle here. And when I click on it, you can see this thick dashed line. That's telling me that this is a multi-state object. And if I click through, you can see all the different states. And then inside of each one of those, we've got a button. And what does this button do? It takes us back to that empty state. So it has this effect of opening something and closing something. And all I have to do is use the layering in InDesign to make it sit on top of things. I can have a backdrop here. I can also make it so it covers anything behind if I want to. There is a super easy way to make pop-ups if you haven't done it before. You can use the in5 build wizard. So I'll go to the in5 menu, build wizards, and the pop-up builder. And it lets me select, you know, a basic UI to start with. So since we already have light in here, I'll make this one dark. So you'll see the contrast. We can choose the size of the dialog box. It's going to build the backdrop. It's going to build the close button for me. And I can have it style it a little bit. So I'll have a drop shadow, rounded corners. And importantly, I'm also going to have it automatically create object styles for me. And the advantage of that is then I can edit those and easily update things in my entire document. And then if I choose to build a pop-up on another page, it'll pick up on those styles that I have in the document without having to recreate them. So here is the outcome of that. There's a rectangle in the middle to put my content. There's a close button up here. Again, I can manually edit this. I can use object styles. If I go into the object styles, you can see everything is connected to something. So if I wanted to change the color of these lines, for example, I could go to fill and let's just make it green because it's right there. I actually think it is the stroke. Let me just make it bright green, no fill. Okay, and there now the button is green. So completely controlled by styles, and you know, I didn't have to build all the interactivity. So now if I look at the object states panel, again, I'm just going to hit my escape key, and that's going to take me out to, you know, a higher level in terms of the stacking, which, you know, if you haven't done much of this in InDesign, it might kind of remind you of Illustrator when you double click on something and it takes you into these nested objects and you can keep escaping out of it. That's kind of how object states work in InDesign. So empty state, again, there's this little, it automatically created this empty rectangle for me. And then I've got this pop-up state. And all I have to do to make that pop-up appear is to select something. So let me take this back to empty. You know, I could select one of these, and it's got, this one doesn't have an action on it. So if I wanted to add one, I could go, I click the plus sign, say go to state, and then I could choose my brand new pop-up and tell it to go to the pop-up state. And I can add states to the pop-up. You know, if I can have videos in there, I can have multiple states with different videos, any kind of content you can imagine. So hopefully you're starting to get the sense of how sophisticated these object states are in terms of what you can create. Again, this is kind of another object state idea. So clicking on one of these takes you to one state or another. These buttons could look identical, and as the user's interacting, you could be changing the display without them even noticing it. And so if they go through a certain sequence of events, they click on a button, and then if they went through a different sequence of events, they would click on a button that looks identical, right? Instead of being red and blue, they'd look the same and be in the same place, so they have no idea that they're clicking on something that is tailored to them. But it is because you're using these object states to control how your page appears. And you don't even have to think of the page as a page anymore. You can think of it as a slide or a screen or something else. And you now have control of dynamically changing this. One thing I'll bring up just because it came to mind, if designing for the screen is new to you, you know, I would recommend, you know, thinking about that. Some people will take documents that they made for print, just export them to flipbooks. That's totally fine. And then other times people are purposely trying to create digital experiences. And when you do that, I would encourage you to think about the things like this that you can do with digital that you can't do with print. So if I was creating a print document, I'm basically expecting somebody to flip through every page and see all of the content. And there might be a lot of content that's not relevant to them. And that might cause them to lose interest, or even worse, like what if there's something in there that's really useful to them and they don't get to it? So you can do the things with digital that make it, you know, really specific to that person looking at it. You don't have to overwhelm them with content, because you can always use their interaction to change what's on the screen to bring up more content, more relevant content to them. You can have little teasers and have them expand them. So it's good to really start thinking about digital and think about what you can do with the animations and the object states. You know, as you saw in those customer examples at the beginning, they're using all of these tools. And so most of it is their creativity. It's, you know, how they're thinking about these things, which is, you know, what we do as designers, right? We try and come up with these ideas and think about the person who's going to be seeing them. And then on this last page, we've got the image sequence. So as I mentioned, this is a concept inherited from DPS, and it's now in the interactive widgets menu. So I will go down to the image sequence panel, and you can see this just points to a folder which has a bunch of PNGs that I exported from a video in Photoshop, and they are automatically named in sequence 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, etc. And so I just selected that folder, automatically populated this. I could have it play like a slideshow, you know, with some interactivity, tapping to play and pause. But this one is set up to swipe, and it's set up to loop. So if we go back to the file here and go to last page, you can see this is just seamless. If I kept spinning through it, it never ends. And that's because the video was set up, so it ends in the same place it starts. Oops, and I triggered a swipe interaction, which I have turned on for page navigation as well. So that's essentially the document. There's one more thing I want to show you in here, which is this menu. We automatically created that pop-up, but I want to show you can automatically create a menu as well. So I'm going to go down to the pop-up builder. Oops, excuse me. I'm going to go down to the menu builder. Very similar. It's a bunch of automatic stuff. There are 3 different menus, and since I've already created this one, why don't I do that? I'll show you what that looks like, but we can go through and see what all these look like. So I'll keep the dark UI. I'm going to create menu styles, but keep in mind that I already created this menu in this document, and I already set up some object styles. So when I click build this, you're going to see some of those styles get applied to this menu. You can see you probably already saw it's red with rounded corners. So if I go to the object states panel, this is my hamburger icon that's automatically generated, and this is my open state. So it automatically put all these in, and again, each one of these things, this is a button, inside there is text frame, and there is a paragraph style for that. So if I wanted to change that for some reason, let's say I make it bigger. Of course, some of this text is going to overflow, so I'll probably undo this, but I'll make that bigger. Right click and say redefine style. Oops, I clicked the wrong button. Redefine style. You can see all these get updated. So let me just undo that. So you can see how easy it is to create and edit this menu. Let me go back even further. I'm just going to keep hitting undo until the pop-up's gone. Excuse me, until the menu's gone. And I'm going to go back to the menu builder. And let's make a top bar menu. I haven't even tested on this document, so it may not look great because we might have some long page titles, but we'll let it do its thing. So now it's made a menu across the top. Yeah, you can see we got long page titles and too many of them for this particular format. But you get the idea. This is a completely different looking menu. I put it at the top for us. And again, all of these are active buttons. And I could go in and change the paragraph style, make the text smaller, and manage this. But for obvious reasons, I just have way too much content here, and I wouldn't make that kind of menu. It's worth noting, though, that menu makes sense. Let me redo it. On like a desktop view, this type of menu, if I didn't have so many pages with long titles, I could put this on my desktop view, but then on my other view, I could have the compact menu, right? So that's something to think about. You can have these different menus for your different layouts. One other thing I want to note about creating these alternate layouts and exporting them as responsive layouts with in5 is that I have 2 in this document, but you could have a lot more. So if you wanted to have a big desktop layout, a small desktop layout, a tablet horizontal, a tablet vertical, a phone horizontal, phone vertical, or like multiple different phone layouts, you can do that. I don't think you need that many because you can have it automatically scale in between, as we saw in this. So this is proportionally scaling, and then it switches. So personally, I think 3, 4 layouts, sometimes only 2, gets you a really long way, but you have that option, so I want to mention that. And I want to show you the last type of menu because I think that is also very cool. So the sliding door menu is the other option. And I'm just going to go ahead and build that. You can see it's creating all these InDesign elements. And it's all done. Let me hide it. So this is now a menu that sits off to the right. I've got this button here, and when I click the button, it slides in. And I think we should be able to preview that. So I'm just refreshing the preview. Click that, it goes out and in. And again, you can change the styling of this. It's just sort of got a default look, but I can go in and change the color and change the type and all that. All right, so those are all the different menus that you can create. You know, one more thing I'll dive into just because I talked about presentation mode, and we've got time, is I'll show you that exists here under enhancements. So I can configure it this way, and the way I do it is enable presentation mode, and I've got all these presentation specific options. Down at the bottom is the autoplay menu that I mentioned. So David Blattner has used this for the screens that are always playing at the Creative Pro conference in between. So he builds InDesign animation, does these presentations in InDesign, and then has them play on a loop on the big screen. So people do use that for trade shows, and you know that is just one of the huge advantages of exporting to HTML. So when you export, let me turn this off. And just before I leave InDesign to talk about the exported files, I'll also show you the custom slide transitions. So for each page, I can set an in and out transition. I can manage all the pages at once, all the different transitions, and I've got this magic button that I mentioned to slice a multi-page image, and it will automatically apply slide transitions for me. Just to cover all the bases. Okay, so when I've exported this, I'll get a lot of different options what to do, and usually it's just open in the browser, which is what we saw, but I can also see my files in the output. So this is what you get when you output the document. Automatically creates this folder for you. You can choose to have it be named a different folder, and unless you chose a multi-page option, you're going to just get a single HTML file. The multi-page option will generate an HTML file for every page. So there's certain cases where you might want to do that. Otherwise, you're just going to have a single HTML document. This contains all your pages and an assets folder. And the assets folder contains all the stuff needed. It's got video in here. It's got JavaScript. There's a folder of images that are generated for the document, for example, and all the CSS that controls the styling. And then what you would do with these files typically is take them and put them up on a website. And usually you'd use an FTP program, and you just drag the local files onto your website, and then you can see them anywhere. I might take a moment to say, if you've never done that before, I've got a free course for you. This is a subscription site. This is separate from in5. There's a subscription cost in5 itself, and there's a bunch of free videos and stuff. But what I was hearing from people is they wanted really deep courses, because as you may be seeing from this, there's a lot you can do. While it's reasonably simple and the tools in InDesign are pretty easy to use, a lot of options, there's a lot of variety and stuff you can create. So we've got individual courses on all those things, like the, let me go back to the example. As soon as my little Zoom thing goes away and I can get there, let's see, here it is. This example, which is that 3D image sequence where I'm swiping, there's a course just on making a 3D product demo, which is basically exactly that. But because I brought up the topic of what you do with these files, because this is one way that it's distinct from, say, like Publish Online. Aside from some of the added tools with in5, they're fairly similar, except that when you do Publish Online, it goes to an Adobe server, and that's where it lives. In the case of in5, it gets exported to your computer, and you own the files, and you can put them anywhere you want, which is great, but also it means you kind of have to know what you want to do with them. So I created this free course. So if you go to academy.ajarproductions.com and look at the courses available, there's a free course on publishing to your own custom domain and website. And it walks through all the steps I just kind of glossed over, where you have your own site, you use an FTP application, you drag your local files to the remote computer, and then you get a URL, and you're able to share that URL with people. And the main reason that course is free is just because I think everybody should be able to know how to do that and be able to do that. Long before I started my business and like actually had a product I could sell, anything like that, somebody was kind enough to sit down with me and like walk me through the stuff that I needed to know to set up my own like web domain, to have ajarproductions.com, and what I needed to do, and just like giving me some basic literacy. And I wouldn't have been able to do anything without that. And then once I had it, it was just like super empowering. And obviously, if you don't have that already, it's a fantastic thing to think about in terms of branding and in terms of having a place that everybody can come back to. And then in this context, it gives you a place to publish your stuff. So I would recommend checking that out. And then there's a bunch of other things you can do with it. Got stuff on if you want to make it membership based, so people pay, or it's somehow private. There's more courses on adding interactivity. There's courses on creating mobile apps. I will say right now, Adobe has end of lifed Phonegap Build. Was this wonderful tool that came with Creative Cloud that just allowed you to upload a zip package of HTML, which is what in5 creates, and make a mobile app that worked on iOS and Android. And that's going away, unfortunately. So we're working on coming up with other courses about that. There are other tools. They're not as inexpensive as Phonegap Build, at least not the super easy ones. So anyway, just putting that out there as an idea, because the possibility still exists to create an app. And there's also tools that let you do a kiosk app. Kiosk Pro is one of the ones that I've had customers use. If you just have a screen, like a kind of museum type display. I also had customers who were using sales enablement tools. So if you're wondering, how do I just get this on somebody's iPad privately without putting it on the web? A sales enablement tool is something you might want to look at. Vablet is the one I recommend most frequently. It's like tablet, but with a V. And that basically lets you give specific access control to people. It's often used with sales teams. So if you're in the marketing or design department, and you're creating something for salespeople to go out in the field, they would have their iPads or Windows devices or whatever, and you would upload this HTML, and automatically you can set it up to go into specific people. You can have different presentations for different regional markets, and the design and marketing department is kind of controlling how that stuff goes out to people's iPads, automatically gets loaded on and available offline. So that's super cool, super specific use. And just goes to show you, once you get this stuff out of InDesign into HTML, you have all this flexibility. You have a format that can go just about anywhere. So I am I think I'm just about at the point of like, these are all the things top of mind. So I'm wondering if anybody has any specific questions while I'm still sharing my screen, if things they want to see in InDesign, they want to see anything specific demonstrated. You can pop it in the chat pod. And yeah, Jeff or Mary, if you want to call any of that out, I'm opening the chat pod now.
Yeah, actually, Myra's here and she's been answering a lot of questions. I can't believe how quickly she types.
Wonderful. Myra is fantastic. Thank you, Myra.
Yeah.
And Myra, if there's anything you saw that you think I should cover, let me know.
Amy Bellows just asked, how did you create in5? She must have missed the beginning of the presentation.
Oh yeah, I'll be happy to answer that. And then Blake will talk about PWA. So in5, I'll say briefly because I did talk about it at the beginning. I worked with a lot of designers. I was a Flash designer and developer, designing for all screens. And then the iPhone and the iPad came out. There's no Flash on that, but still people were asking, can you make stuff to put on the iPad? And as a Flash developer, there were ways to do it, and it was really expensive, and clients didn't want to pay for it. And it also just neglected the fact that I worked with all these talented designers, and I couldn't leverage their tools. I couldn't leverage their skills with the tools available. And so I started looking at what was available, and I found, I rediscovered all this interactive tooling inside InDesign. I'm like, well, all designers know InDesign. It's kind of the core of the suite, and but there's nowhere to go with this. So the only way I could export it at the time was a SWF. So I launched a Kickstarter project with the idea of being able to export HTML from InDesign. And I had just enough confidence that I could do it because I'd been scripting Flash for a while, and I had done one InDesign script previously, and I did just enough of a proof of concept to feel confident that I could create this. So it was a small amount that I requested, because I was just like, oh, well, I just want to cover my freelance time for that, and I'll work on that for a few months. And it raised like 2.5 times what I was asking for, and then I just continually kept getting requests from people to have it do different things. So that the Kickstarter project was in 2012, and as I got those requests, I just kept adding more stuff. And so it started pretty simply, and it's gotten a lot more sophisticated over time. So that's why you see all these things inside InDesign and in5. And I will say it has a lot to do with the wonderful extensibility of InDesign, its ability to be scripted, to be able to add a menu to the application. Not a lot of programs can do that. So there's this menu that lives up here, and that allows me also to be able to create user interfaces and things. So yeah, it's been a continuous cycle of feedback of what people want. And I still have, if you just stopped now and I didn't hear from anybody, but I knew people still wanted to use in5, I probably got 2 years worth of stuff that I would want to add to it. So it's been a continual process. So that kind of transitions into Blake's question, which is about exporting to a PWA, which stands for Progressive Web App. So hang on, just take a drink of water. So to tell you what in5 does have right now, let me just save this document and go to the full export menu. And you'll see under under output that I have a lot of different options, including these web apps, which if you've ever seen an option to save to home screen on, like, probably most commonly on iOS, it's what you're seeing is a web page, but when you save it, there's just a little bit of extra code in there that makes it behave like an app. So you save it to your home screen. It's got a custom icon. You can do caching, and then it behaves like an app. And I'd seen Chris Converse do a course on lynda.com, and I was like, oh, that's great. And I think I could just add that. This is one of these ideas, that just feedback that just kept making this product more and more useful. And so the reason I bring up that web app topic in the context of the progressive web app is because this will probably start to transition to something that is going to be progressive web app compatible. The caching that's used now, the caching is changing basically. It's more complicated in a way, but it's also more flexible, and I think it's going to allow for more storage space. So you can make larger web apps. But the other thing in switching that over is that it creates this ability to make it the web app concept more generic. So instead of just being specific to iOS or Android, you have this ability to do a desktop progressive web app as well. And the way that will work when it's available in the output is right here on the right side of the browser. There would be a little plus sign if it was a PWA, and I could click that and then install it. And so that is something that is right on the horizon for us. I don't have a planned integration. If I do have customers who export and then they have the little bit of their own custom code. It's like a JavaScript file or two that you have to add. But I'm working on integrating that so that it's seamless and you just export from in5 the way the web app works that I just showed. So yeah, that is one of those things on my list that is coming. It's just a matter of getting it seamless and kind of the perfect way. A lot of these features I have sitting on my plate, I sit on them until I feel really good about how we're doing it, so that it's not adding complexity to your life when you have to figure out how to export it, or if not making you do something extra with the files when they're output. So there is a question about how many days the trial lasts. The trial has no time limit, but it's feature limited. Myra just put in an article there that describes what happens in there, but basically it watermarks some things. For certain features, it'll limit the number of pages that you can export, but you should be able to try out most of the actual features and not necessarily worry about when you install it. I would say just install it and start using it, because it's not going to cut you off at any point. Okay, looks like Mary asked me, is supported in emails. So okay, this is a question that comes up a lot. Can I send it, in Mailchimp or Constant Contact? No, that's the short answer. The HTML. So, I say mostly that HTML lives everywhere, but email is just one of those places where it is stuck in 1999. It really doesn't have any sophistication. Some of it is for a good reason, because if you were to put JavaScript in there, which you can't now, it would pose a security risk to your email client, right? So there's that. I don't know why they haven't upgraded the CSS, but you're dealing with a similar problem that I was discussing with PDF readers too. Is like when you're targeting email, it's like how many different apps, how many different sites are people reading email in? I mean, off the top of my head, I could say Gmail, Yahoo has multiple readers, Hotmail, Outlook. Hey, like you could just go rattle off a bunch of them. So there's no consistency in how people are reading it. And unfortunately, that means you just don't have a lot of control over how that looks. So I have an article for anybody who's interested. Maybe Myra can find this and put this in the chat pod. It's called "What's the Difference Between HTML5 Email and a Unicorn?" And the answer is, one of them is like a fantasy, and the other one's a unicorn. Boy, Myra did find that fast. So the link is available in the chat pod for you. So what I do is present some alternative options. And generally as a strategy, simple is better, simple and personal. And what you can do is link out to a sophisticated design. Linda still wants the unicorn. Yeah, well, the unicorn is more real than the HTML email, Linda, so probably good. And I see you got another question. You're going to send a view. So you could send it as a PDF attachment, but again, I think if you have the ability to have your own site and you can post content on your site and link to that, that's even better than an attachment. And if you have minimal styling in the email, most email readers are going to let your email through. Like, you're not going to get marked as spam nearly as often if you have really simple formatting in your email. Then link out to something sophisticated, because really the goal, I'm speaking almost as a business owner now more than a designer or a developer, but your strategic goal in an email is to get somebody out of email, right? It's like, that's the action you want them to take, is to click something and get out of the email. And then you can take them to something more sophisticated. So generally, that's what I recommend. There is an option discussed in there where, say you wanted to use InDesign to create animation, export it with in5. We have a tool to turn that animation into an animated GIF. So you could put that in an email, because you can put images in there. And that is, that's a decent option. Or you can go like full sophistication and like look at Chris Converse. Chris Converse has a good Lynda/LinkedIn learning course on like doing hand coding responsive emails. You can do that, but again, it's just like you have so little control over how it's going to look in somebody's email reader. So that's stuff to think about. Lisa is asking, can I show you a website that was built on this? Yeah, Myra has a link to the showcase, which is great. The showcase has a bunch of different things in here. And for example, I could just filter for website. Project Marinus, this video is a really good one to look at. So I'll tease a little something. We're in a beta right now. You have to have a paid gold subscription to get the features to participate in this particular beta. But I'm betaing the ability to create fixed elements. So like a sticky menu at the top. So I'm going to paste this into the chat pod so everybody has the link. So you can sign up here. But once I do this, this is going to open up a lot more web design options. In the sense of like a scrolling website, like you see with the Marinus scrolling website project. So when you view this, the pages are stacked on top of each other with no space in between, and then you can have animations that trigger as the different pages appear. You can change the sizes of the pages, so they don't even really behave like pages. They're like vertical sections in your website, and you'll be able to have a sticky menu pinned to the top or the left or wherever you want. So that's coming up, and I think you're going to see a lot more website examples after that. It's gonna be able to do a lot more stuff that that people were doing in Muse, but they can't do because Muse is going away. And yeah, Mary said no more Dreamweaver. Yeah, this is super easy compared to Dreamweaver. I see Ken Ken's asking a question: is the output fairly browser and device agnostic? And the shorter answer is yes. So we focus on controlling how it looks for you. Like our goal is to make it look like InDesign. With the one exception, if you're trying to export live text, you know, you kind of got to figure out how to manage that, because it's going to create some variability. But distinct from that, like that's the goal of in5, is to create the layout and the interactivity from InDesign. And so when it comes to different browsers looking different, like you really shouldn't have that issue. And if you have that issue, it does come up, right? Because there's tons of stuff that that changes. Then reach out to us, because we really strive to support all the major modern browsers. There are, of course, older ones. We don't support IE8 anymore, and I wouldn't recommend using IE9, 10, or really 11. A lot of stuff will work in 10 or 11, but those are really the edge cases. But in terms of recent versions of Safari, Microsoft Edge, Chrome, Firefox, like everything should be working and looking the same, because that's our job. That's, you just make the design in InDesign, and it's our job to figure out how to make it look that way in all the browsers. So I think we do a pretty good job of that. Somebody's asking about, will the Muse code become outmoded, unusable? Probably, just knowing how the web changes. So that's one thing that we try to do with in5. It's one reason that I switched to subscription a couple of years ago, because it allows us to keep up with changes in InDesign and changes in browser. And we're always discovering new stuff. We're dealing with new browser quirks and putting out updates, once or twice a month, with little fixes, and then a couple of big feature updates a year usually. So yeah, that's definitely something we watch out for, and I'm trying to keep it so that it does look the same and work on all browsers for you. All right, I'm just scanning around. So anybody else has a question? If you had a question up above and you want to repost it, if you want to hear the answer or demonstrate something, just go ahead and repost it in the chat pod. I'll be watching down there.